for
Yeah,
two
yeah.
opening seconds. I believe we're live. We are live. We're this hour. We are joined by Dr. Lorena Marquez, and I'm very thrilled to have you on today as a guest this hour.
Thank you.
Can you please tell us about some of the things that tell us about your educational journey. Put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. And I go by Doctora Lorena, just to let you know.
I'll get that right next.
um, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, my doctoral journey started. I mean, I think I was not. I think I was the individual who would write down goals, and at that time, I only knew about PhD programs, and so wrote down hope to get my PhD one day. And then unfortunately I lost a student on campus, and that kind of propelled me. I saw things that I didn't like happening in the academy, and that propelled me to know that I had to be a part of the table in order for me to make changes when things were happening that weren't well for our students, our Latino communities of color. So I got into an EDD program, and I was one of four or five Latinos in the program, and only two of us finished. And my research is around parental engagement um, for Latinx student success in higher education. And I remember thinking, like, my parents were very involved in my higher education journey, but only because I involved them. Really, there isn't a lot of engagement of parents, and the myth is that Latino parents don't care about education. But I always, mention that it's knowledge is power, but it's also what you do with it, right? So the action piece. And as the self-proclaimed, feminist, artivist, definitely wanted to finish my dissertation, as we all do, and that's a journey of itself. um, but wanted to also make sure that that book, the black book, the green book, whatever the book was, that it just didn't sit on the shelves of a library, but that I also put it into practice. And I always thought about, like, how are my tios or my cousins gonna read this or put this into action. And so, yeah, I think that my journey definitely was rooted in my cultura, my community, and also all the different experiences that I have. And as someone that had to navigate as a first gen higher education, I just felt comfortable bringing my parents to our Dia de los Muertos on campus, and asking them to, come to sit on parent panels, and to help not just the university that I'm at, but also to then extend their efforts to, like, their compadres and comadres, in terms of other parents in the unified school district, the local unified school districts that I've worked with. And so that's been my journey. I think it's always been connected to making sure that I give back, and also to honor my parents. And I think being able to see the research, and now do some of that work is really, really important for me. And I'm just continuing to do some of that.
Fantastic. Can you tell, because there's a wide cross section of people watch this that are coming from way different backgrounds. So can you tell our audience a little bit about your work at the Cesar Chavez Center, the Dia de los Muertos, all the stuff at Cal Poly Pomona?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been blessed to have a lot of opportunities, a lot of different titles and positions, but for me, it's always about the people that I engage in those spaces. So one, and for first most, is the students. Working with students and not for students, and I think that that's something that I challenge institutions of higher education to break. And really, we're not there to assist students that are in need, but we're there with them, learning, engaging these spaces. And so I'll start off first. I worked with student athletes in the intercollegiate athletics program at Cal Poly Pomona, and definitely learned a lot. I mean, that's a male dominated space. So it was a lot of opportunities for me to, step out of what I knew in what I read, but then also experience, unfortunately, some um, sexism and gender bias and all that kind of stuff. But helping the students also see their potential outside of just the sport that they participated. So I was there about 3 years, and just really helped to create like more of a model of leadership development for student athletes outside of their, being on the leader on the field, the courts, or track or whatnot. And so that definitely helped me then launch into the Cecily Chavez Center for Higher Education, where I was there for about 6 years working with students on many social justice related programs and services. We helped create the Dreamers Ally training for our undocumented students and folks. Dia de los Muertos, as you mentioned, you've been at our Dia de los Muertos a couple of times in terms of performing, but just creating like more of a multicultural approach to Dia de los Muertos, and and had like academic courses that were connected to it, and that had been since the beginning. I didn't create that, but just engaging more our students and having that learning, but then also that cultural awareness that existed within Cal Poly Pomona, but then taking the next step and inviting the community. So worked with the I see Dr. Jose Calderon. I always say he's my Cesar Chavez, and so worked with him and the Latina roundtable in terms of just the Pomona Unified School District, getting the word out to the community of Pomona and the surrounding areas. And so we were featured, and the Los Muertos grew. And I think for me it wasn't just about like the Latinx component of it, but also just how to get others to understand death being a part of life, and then also honoring those that had passed, and to create like some joy and happiness in the memories versus staying in the darkness. But we would have taiko, Japanese taiko drummers. We'd have Aztec dancers. And it was just a really great way to infuse learning and doing. And Cal Poly Pomona was, learned by doing.
Yeah. And it also had all those ofrendas all over the lawn. You had the altars all over the
Oh
place.
yeah. I mean, Dia de los Muertos is about that. So I mean, it's now become very popular, Dia de los Muertos, but I know that has always been part of the importance of the messaging at Cal Poly Pomona's Dia de los Muertos is the altars, ofrendas, and there's a huge community altar. Dr. Gilbert Cadena is, a huge mentor of mine as well, and he helped start Dia de los Muertos at Cal Poly Pomona. And so being able to be a part of something that I was as a student, and then try to see how to make it not bigger in a sense, but how to make it more of a community oriented event. We had about 30 to 35 altars that we would have any other year, and then we started to get known for like the place to be for small local Chicanx Latinx bands to kind of get their start. So we've had La Santa Cecilia was my first one, and that one I can't take credit for. They were already booked when I got there. But Chicano Batman came through, Las Cafeteras, La Chamba, just all the individuals. And it's just, it's beautiful to be able to share space. And the ofrendas were all like in a circle. So it's also, we were building like a circle of healing and community and positive messaging.
Definitely. So we have a question from the audience from Jose Calderon, and he asks, "What are some of the biggest obstacles that transfer students are facing?"
Yeah. So then I moved into the poly transfer area, and I think for that was an excellent question, Dr. Calderon. But I think what I'm seeing is not. I mean, students are definitely facing this, but I always want to put it on the institutions. So institutions aren't meeting the needs of transfer students in just the basics of understanding their populations. And so at poly transfer, I've been able to have an understanding of that, understand why we are one of the first transfer centers at a CSU, right? Because people usually think transfer spaces are for community colleges, but we need to be able to receive these transfer students. These students are predominantly students of color, undocumented, formerly incarcerated, African American, male, right? Like these are the students that are the most marginalized, and they come through the pipeline of the community college. And so I think it's the issue isn't the student, it's the institutions working better to make sure that pipeline is a smooth pipeline. And so being able to create a transfer receptive culture, which is another theory that we put into practice at Poly Transfer coming out of the work of UCLA, and really just having institutions understand their populations. Capua y Pomona had, when I first started, 49% of the population every year coming in was transfers. And I just, in my marketing way, was just able to create imagery and marketing and messaging to have our institution understand, like, this is our population, and so we've been successful. Like, our students have been successful, our transfer students have been successful in getting an ASI position, so student government position, created, working with orientations to look at transfer orientation differently, because it was offered in a very non-equitable way for freshmen versus first year high school students versus transfer students. And then just having a better understanding of institution agents have to have a better understanding of the transition that is constantly occurring. So they transition from community college to the 4 year that they choose, and then they have to transition into that 4 year and then transition out, graduate, right? So within 2 to 3 years there of transferring, there's a lot of transition. And, we're all going through huge transition right now, right? And trying to figure out how to normalize what is the way that we live. And so imagine having to be someone that is a transfer that's coming into institution that can be pretty scary. And we want to be able to support them. So that welcoming, transfer receptive culture includes financial aid, includes the welcoming message through orientation. That's the first place of engagement, really. And then also just being able to foster really amazing faculty support. We all, well, if you don't know, research states that faculty engagement is the number one indicator of student success. And so being able to quickly get a transfer student to be connected to research and to a faculty member to be able to guide them through in the 2 to 3, 4 years that they're at the institution is key. So
Yeah.
and I've done, and I think I've been able to just, when have access to different committees, I just voice the voices of my students that I work with, and
Yeah.
just make sure to also put them in the table once I get the opportunity.
Yeah. So our audience right now, our potential audiences in the future, come from a broad cross section society. So to tell them, people who might not be familiar, a little more about this organization you spoke of, the Latina Roundtable.
Yeah. I mean, yes, Jose, I will pay my dues. I got an email the other day, uh, but part of any society, I think, is the collective good, right? And I think for me, I have been able to engage with different individuals that are always thinking about collective good. And so I appreciate that question, because I think even though I'm in education, I'm at an institution, I never just stay there, right? I'm always connecting, collaborating in order to create community. And so the Latina Roundtable is a group that just does collective work and over around issues on immigration, around building community, around developing future leaders. And really, I think that being able to see that it can be done, that you can use your knowledge that you read and put it into practice, to me, that is so valuable. Being able to, have someone like Dr. Calderon say that, pedagogy into actual practice and change, like that means the world to me. And that's something that I hope to model to my students as well, and to anybody that I engage with, that you can read something, but what is it that you're actually doing? Yesterday, someone very special to me was saying that I should use my platform to make people challenge the system, and but very directly, right? Like there's all these in the world of that we are living in right now, online, virtually. We can always be taking into participating in these water challenges, music challenge, but what about, like, I mean, really, like, what about us challenging ourselves to do better in our community? And that doesn't mean you have to be the next Dolores Huerta. You don't have to be the next Dr. Martin Luther Jr. King, or I said his wrong you know who I'm talking about. Uh, it just means like do your piece, right?
Yeah.
Like do your piece wherever you're at, what in society. If you're a professor, if you're an engineer, if you're a farm worker, that you really do look at the kindness component, and not kindness in the sense of like be positive and ignore the realities of the world, but just understand the realities of the world, understand the oppressive systems that exist, and do your piece in being able to like um, dismantle it.
Yeah.
One of Audre Lorde's quotes is about like you can't dismantle the master's um, tool like with using his tools, right? We got to use different tools. So we have to be able to understand that we can't be the same. And I hope that even during this time that we're living in, that we recognize that there is a lot of things that are changing and we have to do better. And so it's exciting and it's scary, but I think it's definitely time for some transformation and change.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the things that people are doing to try and make a change and do their part, as you say, can you tell our audience a little bit about this thing you started, Dinner with Doctoras?
Yeah. It's a hashtag, so people can look it up. It's Dinner con Doctoras. Um, but about 2 years ago, I was just interested. I had finished up my doctorate and wanted to communicate and connect with other doctoras. And oh, thank you, Gina. Gina with the Audre Lorde quote. Love it. See, that's community right there. But I wanted to connect with other doctoras because of the spaces that I occupied. I knew a lot of doctoras, right? The privilege that I have in terms of being in higher education. I'd go to conferences and meet doctoras. But I also understood that less than 1% of doctoras existed. And so that's a very real number, right? So data informing me to be able to like, how do I counter that? And so I just wanted to connect. And I was part of this Facebook group called Latinas Completing Doctoral Degrees. And in there, like lots of questions about chapter 2, chapter 5, whatever it is, right? Like just getting us through the journey. And I just wanted to be able to meet with others and start talking about, okay, what are we going to do now that we got these degrees? And how are we also going to uplift those that are coming after us? Because I didn't have many doctoras in my life. And so I definitely wanted to develop that kind of energy. And so Dinner con Doctoras, you know, asked, posted on that Facebook group and asked if anybody wanted to come. I had 4 or 5 people come, and it was in Highland Park, and we just enjoyed each other's company. Then from that launched the following year. I literally was in Japan and was just excited about like, let me do this again. It's going to be my birthday month, so I always launch them on my birthday month, April. And yeah, it just kind of grew. I did 5 of them. I did one at UC Santa Cruz, um, Portland because my godson's up there, Oakland, UC Irvine, and then it just kind of naturally grew. Individuals would ask me on that group because I post there like, hey, this happened, or hey, if anyone's in that area, come out. And people in the group started asking, hey, Lorena, can you come to Chicago? Hey, can you come to New York? And I'm like, I don't have a budget for that. And it wasn't about me, right? Like it's not that I have to be there. And so I created a toolkit. I have a toolkit that can be found on at my Doctora Hood Instagram or Facebook, but it's free, and then just sent it out to individuals. And we have been able to create over 20 dinner con doctoras across the nation. And it's super powerful. It's super powerful to see doctoras and future doctoras, because
Yeah.
that's what came out of it naturally, organically. Mujeres were asking also, like, what about us, like future doctoras? And so out came a sticker, some shirts, and the community keeps growing. Last night, we just had our first virtual dinner con doctoras, and we had about 28 individuals that joined, and there's a really excitement around sharing our stories, countering the narrative, and then also just helping each other through the day, because at the end of the day, there isn't a lot of us. As much as I know a lot of them, there still isn't enough of us, and so we're just going to do what we can to be able to make it better for others that are coming after us to be able to access those doctoras that have been able to get through.
Yeah, yeah. I always, anytime people tell me something that catches my ear, I always have these kind of technical questions. So you have franchise is the wrong word, but you have other people starting their own like branches or something of dinner with doctoras in different cities across the country. That's really kind
Yeah.
of very cool to me. So what would be the process of let's say somebody in St. Louis or something like that, and they're like, we love this dinner con doctoras, we want to have it here. Like what are the what happens next?
I mean, just contact me. Like, I mean, they can contact me. My I don't know if I can type in that chat room, but it's at doctora hood underscore or Facebook. Just search doctora hood. I mean, I'm constantly one-on-oneing with individuals. If people really want to just kind of talk it through, I'll get on the phone with them and just let them know what it is. It's nothing. It's nothing. This is gonna sound interesting, but it's nothing that's really that hard. It's just organizing it, right? And I think as an organizer in different spaces and places and people that I watched, it's really about just doing it and starting. And I think that if you have a toolkit, if you feel like, okay, I have more understanding of what's supposed to happen, but it just is very natural. We are asking for these spaces. Um, watching the new show Hentified, every single show at the end I'm crying, and seeing different things that remind me of who I am. I didn't have that growing up. And so I think for me it's being able to do my piece in the world, to be able to change it and to also allow for people to be seen. And I think sometimes it's a dinner, like really it's just pick a restaurant, um, organize something with the folks of the restaurant. We usually ask that it's a woman owned restaurant, if not a person of color owned restaurant, and you can add more, right? I can provide stickers because I do stickers. So it's just a way to show like the love and support that you want to give to others. But it's just you can access me to get guidance, and then it's on you to really organize it. And I want to say it is easy. Like I don't want to. It's never about me. It's about the we, and that's like a Las Cafeteras quote in their song. But just wanting to make sure that people know that they can get it done and they can reach out to others. And there's a need. So um, if someone's interested, again, check out my spots or contact me directly.
You mentioned that in these dinners you have conversations with future doctoras. So, what is some of the advice that you'd give to women of color, doctoras, navigating higher learning?
I mean, I think it's just own your space. I mean, I teach I'm a lecturer at Cal Poly Pomona as well for our ethnic and women's studies department. And in one of the classes, in all of my classes, I talk to students about knowing themselves and loving themselves. And I think that that's important messaging, just because just sharing my story, didn't see myself in a lot of different like media, marketing. So I understand that. Then that's why when I came through my journey, it was the same, right? But with who I know and the networks that I have, I want to be able to create representation. That's why the shirts and the stickers have been created. But then also to allow for them to be themselves completely. I think immediately you get the orientation where they say, don't get married. I mean, they say it to the women first. That's the problem. But don't get married, don't have kids. And almost like you will lose your life because you have to finish this program. And I'd said the opposite of that. I have to be with my family. I have to be able to travel in terms of what I loved. I had to be able to enjoy being able to do yoga, like whatever it is that made me who I am. Because I knew myself, it helped me get through. You can't quit something that fuels you, right? And so it was important for me to have that that kind of conversations that I have with future doctoras, but then also the students that I mentor. I think that that's an important component of how I work and operate. But I think it's important to understand that you can bring your full self into any area that you're interested in. And yes, I mean, I think for me, I've been privileged and blessed to be able to access higher education through um, support from my family, but also looking at fellowships. I actually don't think it's okay to go outside of state, because I think for me, I had support from family and community. And I think when we want to see each other succeed, we have to be realistic. That are we sending off our students to, the middle of Iowa, or places that don't look like them? And are they going to be successful in terms of just being able to feel nourished and supported? And so those are one of the dinner conductoras that I had in San Diego. There was a grad student who was struggling to just finish her master's and was questioning and asking, like, what should I get a doctorate? And I don't tell everyone you need to get a doctorate because we want to increase that number. It has to work for us too. It has to be able to be something that is going to create like wellness. And I think that sometimes the stress of going through the system is going to be oppressive, and you're not going to be able to get through. And that's fine. Like, it's also listening to your heart and being able to understand, like, the cost, and also the commitment, but then also your well-being for it.
So I was actually, what you said kind of it reminded me of something. I was actually um, speaking at a university, kind of the Midwest, but kind of in a small, out of the way place. And I was talking to students. I was there for a few days, and I was talking to students, and I came to understand that almost all the Mexican students were from the city of Bell, and almost all the students who were of Hmong descent were from Fresno, and almost all the African American students were from Newark, New Jersey. So what really occurred in my
Mm.
mind is that this school is aggressively going to different cities and high schools in like districts, and bringing them here. And what all these different groups of people had in common was they were all miserable on this campus, other than their
Mm.
interaction with each other. So I don't want to name the camps because I don't want to like,
Right, 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 right.
it became really clear to me that what this campus was doing was recruiting people so that they could like either get some federal funding, or so
Yeah.
that they could put people on a brochure. And so we see a lot of this, that these schools, um, in faraway distant places in the middle of the country, aggressively recruit students of color from our neck of the woods, in order to serve their needs. And they'll give you like these big packages, but it's oftentimes
Not
not the best
enough.
idea.
Yeah, and also it may not even be enough. It's just one way to kind of get them to come, right? But then, are they really thinking about keeping them? And I think Gina Ann Garcia has a book that we did a book club for the Doctora Hood, and it is called Becoming HSIs. So really, right now, a lot of institutions, even in California, the CSU system, like about half of them, if not more, are Hispanic serving institutions. But they're not. They're based off of enrollment numbers, and right, meeting, I guess, like a quota, really, in order to be able to get access to those federal funds. But a lot of institutions aren't doing their part to actually then use those funds appropriately, to then see the success of Latinos or other communities in terms of other funding sources. So I think for me, it's really being able to be very open and honest. I again stayed here, right? I went to Pomona, Azusa, and Fullerton, and I know that part of it was I just didn't know, in terms of just being first gen, that I could travel out. I also wasn't going to be allowed to, right? My mom was like, you're not going to Berkeley. Um, but I think it's understanding that, having more conversations, that it's also about making sure that they're going to a place where we're handing them off to somebody that we know. Like, there's actually good people there that are going to look after them. And it isn't just a numbers game. And I think with the work of Doctora Garcia, it's definitely about questioning institutions of becoming Hispanic serving institutions and not just enrolling Hispanic, high number of Hispanics in terms of the HSI-ness of that grant that is received by funding sources. So I think, yeah, it's just being really open and honest that the students have to be successful, and the success isn't just the graduation component at the end, it's the amount of years that they are going to be there at the institution. So are there people that look like them? More importantly, are there faculty that look like them? And, I'm sure, like, I know that I ran into the Mexican American Student Association house on Cal Poly Puebla's campus. That was where I was able to like see myself and build community. But do these other spaces have those kind of support systems even for peer-to-peer? And I think that there's a lot of research also that says like that peer-to-peer mentorship is like a huge component of students being able to just stay and feel like they belong, if they're out of state.
Definitely. So for again, the people that be watching this wide cross section, people, not everyone's involved in higher education. I'm involved in this, that, the other. So can you tell the audience a little bit about what an HSI is? What does a designation mean, and why do certain campuses pursue it, and etc.
Yeah, so I mean, HSI just is stands for Hispanic Serving Institution, and I forget the actual percentage, but I believe it's like at least 25% of those that attend a specific institution have to identify as Hispanic, and so that is how then the federal government is able to give them Title V grants and funding. From that, it has been found through the research of Dr. Garcia that a lot of the institutions aren't necessarily like using that money dollar for dollar specifically for Hispanic, Chicanx, Latinx students. That really it's being used for just the entire university. So if they build a computer lab, they can kind of just say that this computer lab was a part of like Hispanic serving institution designation and being able to meet the success of Latinx, Chicanx students. But really, it's a computer lab for the whole institution. So it isn't specific support or resources that is being targeted to the population that the grant is actually being granted to. So there's a lot of conversations on how to do that in terms of being able to also be understanding that there's other populations that are marginalized that also need this kind of support, right? And so it's not about like um, uh, oppression Olympics. It's really about making sure that we're doing equitable work based off of who's at the institution, but then also making sure that others are also being engaged in terms of when the student success factors are being considered. And I think for folks years ahead, the hope the hope is that uh, we're looking at who is at our institutions constantly. I think and when I say that, I mean like we are data driven, but I hope to be more data inspired. And the students that are at the institution right now are very different than the students that were there 5 years ago. And so that means institutional agents have to be constantly understanding the differences of the makeup of students. I mean, and that takes effort. I mean, that's making sure that you step outside of your own understandings of your educational journey to be able to see the student that's in front of you. And I think oftentimes policies and rules are being created with no student at the table, with no student conversations. And so my hope is that within the institution of higher education, but then just system wide, that we're always allowing for those that are part of the community that we're working towards, that we're allowing them to also like set up the table with us, right? That it's not just here, this is what we think is good for you. I think that we're starting to see some of that happening now with this pandemic, and individuals stepping up and really just seeing that there's a lot of inequities that have already existed, and they're just becoming more clear for folks that haven't put a lot of time or
Yeah.
energy into it for whatever reason.
Yeah. Well, it's it's quite an accomplishment that you've achieved your doctorate. That's something that's not statistically it's so uncommon in our community, and that's not the fault of our community. I mean that, but that is it's just
Yeah.
it's a glaring statistic. I know for myself, and I know most people who kind of enter into like the world of like you know the mind or thinking or wherever how you want to frame it.
Hmm.
It's very difficult for us because we've had our intelligence questioned our entire lives. In this country, it's just it's constant. It's just even it comes in our household. Sometimes it comes from our peers. It comes from ourselves.
Mm.
I mean, it comes from a blaring a blaring loud noise outside of any of that, telling us that we're not smart. We're not intelligent.
Hmm.
Yet you as an individual have kind of pushed through that. Can you give us some advice to the audience as to how to to keep on keeping on?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've had, like I said earlier, I've had individuals that have shown me, right? Like those that have come before me that have been able to, that I have been able to watch and work with, and have also seen me as an ally. And yeah, I've had these different titles. I've accomplished these different things, and even, you know, pushing the doctora is important to me. But I think the bigger thing is really making sure that you really like take care of yourself, and I think I've had a lot of time understanding myself, in order for then to be able to jump in and out of different communities. I can hang out with a lot of different individuals, and I think the best thing that makes me able to access those individuals, and to have them be open and vulnerable is to mirror that. And so I'm not going to ask anyone to do what I don't practice. And so being able to march and to protest, um, is one way of doing it, but then also to use your voice, right? It's just using your voice, finding your voice, and using your voice in different spaces. And it's scary, believe me. In higher education, people want you to fall in line where, and I believe that's probably any other place as well, right? Just fall in line and follow the pace. But it's really important for me to always think critically. And I learned about critical race theory as a theory in my doctorate program, but I remember thinking like, oh, that's how I think, right? And so being able to understand that, yeah, because I already thought that way, but I was then educated about the language around it way after. Uh, that's why it's important for me to make sure that people understand that they know themselves, but then also have an understanding that their voice is powerful. And it's very small things, very small things that people say that question themselves. And in the space that I have been with like future doctoras, it's like, well, I will defend, or hopefully I will finish. I immediately stop them and say like, you have to change your language. I will defend. Or when I complete my doctorate program or master's program, or that deficit language is in the system, as you have kind of talked about. It's in everything that we see. I mean, me, I never saw myself, um, as a little girl. I never saw myself, right? I mean, I'm brown, dark features. And when Selena came, she really was the imagery for me. Like, I mean, my dissertation was almost on Selena. Like, that was how much she impacted me. But it's because I saw myself. And so representation matters. And then I felt, because I saw myself, there's still a lot of work that I had to do for sure. But I started to do that inner work, and I journaled. I'm a big journaling person. But then I think the biggest gift and superpower that people need to activate is listening, and active listening. In the world that we live in, we're always by our phones, and we're not like really paying attention to people. And I think that being able to do some of those things for me has been helpful for my success. But then more importantly, like the success of others. And um, yesterday I was able to receive like this award from NASPA, which is like an organization for a national organization for student affairs folks. And my mom and my family were all there, but my mom said something like, you do so much, and I never really understand it all, but you do so much. And I think that um, for me, it's like, how do I explain? How do I explain everything that I'm doing in order for her to understand it, and then also for your daughter to understand it? It's this thing that we're always going to constantly be trying to unpack it. But I say the more that we do the work, the more that it's going to be able to assist us all.
Yeah. We have another question from the audience. It says, "I work at a factory. What do you think would be a good way to get blue collar folks into higher education?"
I mean, I would say make sure you talk to a supervisor, a manager, and request it. Request in terms of being able to access what are the benefits that are given, or what needs to be done in order to one get educational benefits through your factory, but then also ask. I mean, for me, it's like those spaces are so important spaces to be able to enter and ask individuals to start thinking about what it is that they want to do in terms of pursuing their education, and also to show them that. So, if I can get, I don't know where you're located, but if I could get into a room like that, I know that that creates knowledge, that creates an ability to understand that there's community college that offers lower cost education that is, if not sometimes better than four-year institutions. And then the whole transfer component that exists as well. There's educational pipelines that can get you to where you want to be in terms of your hopes and dreams. And so I think it's just making sure to constantly write it down, like first personally write it down in terms of what are your goals are, and then start to tap away at it and asking for support from your supervisor, manager, but then also requesting for them to have an individual from your local community college or four-year institution to start building those partnerships to be able to see what can happen, because there's a lot of like career tech education opportunities, but then there's also opportunities to get your associate degree through the community college. And just once you start, really, once that educational mind is allowed to be set on fire, you really can't go, you don't go back, there's a quote on Cesar Chavez, and I probably should know these quotes before I start trying to say them, but like once you like teach
Yeah.
somebody, you can't unteach, or something like, what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, it's just like
But
once
it's
you want to
important
take
to
a
be able.
line, you can't unlearn it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you can't unseen something you have seen. Um, but I think it's just important to know that you have the power, and the power is within, and it's also using your voice. And again, back to like just start, right? And that could be scary, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I think sometimes we hold ourselves back by not just putting it out there and asking.
Yeah. Well, Lorena, Doctora Lorena, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and for all the advocacy you do for for the mujeres and for our entire community. Is there any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
Um, I just want to say thanks, Matt. I've known you for a while, and I admire you from afar, and the poetry stuff that you do. That's one example of just you being able to reach so many different communities, and so appreciate all the things that you do, creativity wise. And I guess my last thoughts for those watching is, do not or do not question your ability to make change. It's definitely within all of us, and I think now's the time in these times to be able to understand that we all, even as one person, can make change happen. And then as a collective, I mean, we can make the world really a different world, the one that we want to live in. Education is important, and knowledge is power, but it's also what you do with that knowledge, because you can have it and just have it, but really is putting it into use and making those connections with others that you admire ultimately. If you see somebody that is doing great things, they'll be more than happy to talk to you. Like when you asked if how do I help dinner con doctoras, if people are wanting to set it up somewhere else, I make myself available. I mean, I'm not gonna make my. I have boundaries, right? We all have boundaries, but I think I'm there to assist someone's own fears of getting started. And I think that that's probably the biggest message I can leave is just get started and meet that fear. And once you meet that fear, you can get over and above it and rise. So do your part. It may look different than my part, but I definitely think I'm following my purpose in life and hope that you can follow yours too.
Thank you, Doctora.